Hi, hello, India developers. Welcome to Build. I hope you're enjoying it so far. Welcome to the special edition, community edition for India. And I'm your host, Pragati, along with Deepak. We will be hosting you for the next 2.5 hours. Just like before we go into the agenda, just like with any Microsoft event, we follow a very strict code of conduct, and any unprofessional behavior will not be tolerated on this event. So just a reminder there, folks. With that, let's get into the agenda right away. And we have an action-packed agenda actually. We have two panel discussions. With our community leaders and our MVPs. We have two spotlights, one with Dattare Jadhav, who is our winner for Hackathon, iCertis Hackathon, and also with Ilyas, who will be talking about the Bangalore and Chennai Azure user groups. We will have a hands-on lab on serverless. And we do have two surprises thrown into the agenda today. So we have Rohan Kumar, our CVP for Azure Data, joining us. And we also have Matt Storringson. I'm sure you've heard of him, the chief designer for C# in India, in Microsoft, joining us. So welcome, Rohan, welcome, Matt. And with that, I will actually hand over to Rohan to walk us through what are the key announcements that we have made and built around data and AI. So Rohan, all yours.
Oh, thank you, Pragati, and hello everyone. It's so awesome and fantastic to actually be a part of this session. You know, when I was looking at which one to pick, I sort of very naturally got attracted to just to go and meet the Indian community. So super thankful for having me over here. So this year build, is obviously very different from the build events in the past. I mean, all of us are going through this. I hope all of you are keeping safe. And we're going through just such a challenging time. And I'm so happy that as a company we pulled off this virtual event. And that is so fantastic to see. So from a data and AI standpoint, there's lots of. I mean, if you just take a look at the book of news, I mean, there's so much of innovation that's come out, but maybe there's a few things. The biggest things we launched, in my section in Scott Guthrie's keynote. We spoke about the advancements we are making in Synapse, which is a big service for analytics that we had launched at Ignite last year, and whose whole vision was really around reducing the time to insight. When getting insights from data and things like that. And the big step we've taken is this release of this new capability called Synapse Link for all our operational databases, starting with Cosmos DB, where you have the ability, it basically enables cloud native HTAP, where you can get real-time access to all the data, that operational data, in the columnar format available to sort of do an analysis, including predictive analysis, if you want to train your machine learning models, etc., within seconds of the transaction, committing, which is a pretty big deal. Typically, if you look at the complexity of setting up a lot of these ETL pipelines, as they're called, and without having any performance impact on your operational transactions. So it's a piece of innovation that we've been working on for about 2.5 years now. And it's the first of its kind. There's no other cloud provider that has anything close to it. And it truly enables, when you think about a lot of your mobile apps, insurance, retail, I mean, almost in every industry, there's scenarios where you want to capture the intent, a user action or something that happens, and immediately make that available in your analytics platform. And we're seeing a significant, interest in that just in the last, 48 hours. I mean, just the interest we've seen. So that's sort of been pretty fantastic. Synapse has entered public preview. We launched it at Ignite. So Synapse Workspaces, the serverless mode that we have, for querying, the Spark service that we have, that's now broadly available for public preview. We released SQL Edge in preview, where you basically can run the core SQL Server engine now on an ARM device like a Raspberry Pi I mean, the footprint is less than 300 megabytes, and it supports the complete relational query processor. So you have, if you want to do, any sort of queries, you want to run AI on the device, for intelligent edge computing, that sort of is a pretty critical element. It's very deeply integrated with all our IoT services. So that's a big one. And then across all the other data services, there's a bunch of investments in auto scale. We've done a lot of investments in security for supporting things like private link, features like bring your own key, managing deep integration with Active Directory, etc. So tons of value. Now on the AI side, I mean, the big announcement really was around responsible AI, and I think Microsoft all up has done a really good job of looking at the pillars of understanding your models, understanding the bias that exists inside your models, which is sort of as you can imagine, in any industry, it's sort of becoming a very critical discussion point at this moment, because people want to make sure there's no unfairness as you start relying on models, decisions being made on models. There's a whole notion of controlling like who has essentially access to the data that you're sort of training on, protecting the privacy of individuals. So there's this whole set of 3 pillars around understand, control, and protect, which is a great first step. There's a lot of talk in the industry, but with Azure machine learning, the team has done a fantastic job of doing that. So anyway, maybe I went a little longer than I was supposed to, but I just thought those are the top things that I wanted to call out.
Great. Thanks so much, Rohan. We've also got an MVP, Augustin, who's one of our local community leaders here, who's super excited to chat you up on some of our announcements. Augustin,
sure.
Do you want to?
Looking forward to it.
Hey, thanks, Rohan. Thanks, Deepak, for the intro too. Rohan, I'm from Bombay, right? And we have most of India's BFSIs and corporate headquarters based here.
Yeah.
Almost all these firms have OLTP systems on-prem.
Right.
That's because of historical and regulatory reasons. But they may or may not have like an OLAP or a data warehouse. Do you foresee Azure Synapse Link in conjunction with Azure Arc data services, which were introduced at last Ignite? And one of the most important premises that wherever they are, will bring that capability to Azure. So do you see that bridging another kind of hybrid? The OLTP on-prem plus analytics on cloud?
Absolutely. So I think first of all, thanks, Augustine, for the question. I mean, and the scenario you're describing is not just limited to the financial services, right? There is several situations where if you look at any large enterprise customer, there's a whole journey that they go through, and the fundamental premise of Arc was, while there is people love the app model, the business model around our managed services. And as you're very well aware, like there's limitations in terms of how quickly they can move to, let's say, a public cloud infrastructure. In fact, what we did not announce, and I mean, we sort of said, we've launched it with Cosmos DB, but we are getting it for other operational databases. One of them, of course, is SQL DB. We are very actively working on it. And if you look at the way we are solving for that, if you go understand, maybe dig a little bit into the technical details over here, you look at the change data capture feed that comes out of any of these operational systems, capture that and convert that into a columnar format that's highly tuned for running like large scans for analytics, doing training with your machine learning models and stuff like that. And the actual replication is based on a physical replication that we support in SQL called Hadron. And so you could have your OLTP system on-prem, you could have your warehousing in the cloud. You don't even have to frankly use Arc. Right. I mean, and that's really, of course, we will have managed services with SQL that you're already aware of, which we've launched in Arc, so it'll work there. But even if you have a standalone SQL server, our ambition, our aspiration is we're going to sort of get this as a part of the next release of SQL, so that even with standalone, you should be able to use this notion of Synapse Link to move your data inside a lake and then do analytics in Azure with Synapse.
Thank you. My next question is actually touches upon this second aspect you did in your talk on the keynote. Here's the thing, data is innocent, right? Is the people responsible for data that are biased? So how would responsible ML tackle this fundamental conundrum?
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, that's a fairly it's a the conundrum that you speak about is very real, right? And if you look at the details of essentially what we are trying to do in especially the when we talk about the understand pillar of responsible AI, right, which is which effectively essentially helps you figure out the unfairness. So if you look at the details of what we're trying to do there is, there's a GitHub project called FairLearn that Azure Machine Learning uses. You can go, there's if you look at the blog that we published around the what we're doing around responsible AI. And so it basically is a Python package, that empowers developers if you're doing, if you're essentially building out machine learning models, and it's essentially trained to detect bias in a decision-making system. So, for example, if it's like a school that's trying to make decisions on admission, or a company that's trying to make decisions on employment, or a bank that's trying to make a decision on loan, they have modeled in aspects where they see potential, in which community or in which sort of cohort, if you will, of users the risk exists. And by no means it's a perfect system. It's basically what's getting started, though. It's getting a lot of traction. We are investing pretty heavily in it, and the idea essentially would be to look at models and determine where the risk exists, and based on the results, based on the decisions that are being made over time, just statistically, hey, do we believe there is, so this is the kind of innovation that's happening. I mean, there is just a lot of focus on this, if you look at it, but again, it's not something that's going to be solved overnight, but ultimately, I think through the decisions, through the data around the decisions that are getting made by the model, we should be able to speak, say with a lot of certainty whether the model itself has bias built into the way it was trained. So that's really the approach, that we're trying to take for responsible AI. It's just the beginning. Again, like I said, as decisions being based on machine learning are going to become mainstream. For Microsoft, with what we're trying to do with Azure Machine Learning, this is a pretty huge area. It's very, very nascent. I will grant you that it's not, by no means we're close to saying it's a solved problem. But some of the best minds are working on it. And if you look at the FairLearn project, if you look at the Interpret Learn, there's another one that sort of figures out constructs like these. It gives you a sense of the patterns that they're looking for after the decisions get made to determine whether the bias exists or not.
Okay, that's good. I mean, the key point I take from that is because it's a OSS project, FairLearn and all, I think so we can incorporate them in our projects and we can see
That's right.
how our data, right?
That's right. And then, just like with anything else, right, it'll learn more through data. I mean, at some point, there will be information around, statistically what makes sense. And, and if that's not happening, then there's at least a risk that gets flagged.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Now, for our last question is, I want you to put your hat as you look at Azure data or not. Now, think of yourself as an undata, right? And for the folks working on data, what technology and concepts, like old or new, should they educate themselves on, and to for their investments in their careers and for the immediate futures? Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and I get this asked a lot, especially as, one of the things a lot of the data professionals I speak to worry, hey, with this whole cloud and managed services, what's going to happen to our jobs? I mean, look, the reality is, if you look at, if I had to play out the next, I don't know, starting now, for the next 30 years at least, there's a significant amount of disruption that's going to happen just in the way companies operate, right? Like just the inner loop of decision making of every company is going to get a lot more data driven. And when you sort of look at that, there's a whole value chain shift that's happening from maybe just like maintaining systems to, okay, how do you sort of derive value from it? So when you think about these cloud architectures where how do you sort of look at what are the cloud native services for analytics? Like, so I'll basically say pick Synapse as an example, or some of the hyperscale investments for operational systems. How do you sort of basically learn about them in the best ways to sort of utilize them. You look at like the serverless model, which is becoming very, very important for a lot of the new microservice architecture designs that are coming in applications. This whole notion of edge computing, especially again, if you just focus yourself around data, that is more and more like pretty much everything that you interact with in your life, with any equipment that you use, cars that you drive, wherever you are, everything is going to be connected. I mean, just look at the hardware innovation that's happening with things like Sphere. It's only going to get, so the whole notion of like how the edge computing comes, the data platforms and analytics that are associated with that, the whole form factor, everything is sort of changing drastically. So, the first thing I would advise is keep up with the innovation. Like Build is a fantastic forum, and not just the high level news and blogs, but deeply understand the features that are coming out, especially on the in the areas that interest you. That's one thing. The other thing I'd say is, there is a lot of barrier today when it comes to things like data science and predictive analytics. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of innovation that's going on to significantly reduce the barrier. So if you happen to be a data developer and engineer, to get you to sort of extract value and insights, which is going to become so important, right? Like today, for example, one of the things that in a lot of the like CMOs, CFOs, and CIOs that I talk to, there is such a strong desire where they really don't want to move away from this opinion-based decision making to becoming a data-driven organization. So the potential and the opportunity is amazing. I'd essentially say, look at all the value that's coming out of Azure, the value that's coming out of Dynamics. There is so much of turnkey offerings that are being built for things like customer 360 product insights, which are going to be so those are the things I'd say. And again, from a development standpoint, the microservices architecture is really where the future is. I mean, I know there's a lot of lift and shift and modernization that's happening, but again, if you play out like you're investing for the next 5, 10, 15 years, that's really how a lot of the programming is going to get done. So that's for what it's worth, that's basically what my input would be.
Okay, thank you, Rohan. Thanks for joining us this evening. Hopefully stay safe, and maybe in the near future we can all meet together with the Indian data community, and you can share your experiences and maybe a build kind of thing happening out here. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, I mean, looking forward to it, and thanks again for taking the time, and thanks for having me over, Pragati and Augustine, for your questions, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of the conference. Thank you. Bye bye.